And now we present to you Government News at 4. It is April 20th, 2012.
Gross domestic product measures a country's total economic output. It is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country during a given period of time. GDP helps with seeing the growth in the health of the country's workforce.
That's all we have for today. Thank you for your time. To Government News at 4 p.m. Today's date is April 20th, 2012. Today we will be looking back at last year's GDP for 2011, where we were in the business cycle and what policies that led to it.
The total GDP for 2011 was $15.94 billion. At the end of last year, we were going into a peak in the business cycle, as shown by the increase of 1.8% from the third to fourth quarter. Most of the reasons the fourth quarter GDP went up included contributions from private inventory investment, personal consumption expenditures, exports, and residential fixed investment. Those were partly offset by negative contributions from federal government spending and state and local government spending.
The economy grew almost twice as fast over the summer compared to the spring, indicating a peak in the business cycle. Many retailers cited mixed results and increased optimism for 2012, but many manufacturing contacts are uncertain about their outlook despite the current good results. The majority of producers continue to report growth, with year-over-year revenue increasing ranging from mid-single digits to 20%. In the most recent quarter, the majority of contacts in the 1st District of Boston reported conditions that were roughly the same as last year.
During the 2011 year, expansionary fiscal policies were being used. New reform laws provided a budget of $135 billion to continue the president's race to the top challenge, and $1.6 billion for immigration and customs enforcement programs.
In terms of monetary policy, the government was attempting to be expansionary. They lowered market expectations for short-term investment rates, which reduced the current level of long-term interest rates and lowered borrowing costs. They also eased conditions in credit and financial markets, which encouraged spending from households and businesses. In addition, the government developed the tested tools that allowed them to drain and immobilize bank reserves in order to tighten the relationship between the reserve requirement and other short-term interest rates.
That is all for today. Thank you for tuning in to Government News at 4.
Welcome to Government News at 4 p.m. Today's date is April 20th, 2016. Today we will be looking back at last year's GDP for 2015, where we were in the business cycle and what policies led to that.
The total GDP for 2015 was $18.128 billion. During the year of 2015, we were in an expansion and had an increase of 1.5% in the fourth quarter.
Retail increased at low percentages enough to affect the GDP. Furniture sales were higher for the late year in December, but lower than normal. Residential real estate markets had very good reports in the 1st District.
In terms of fiscal policy, the president was attempting to be expansionary. The stock market was at an all-time high over the year. A simple tax code was proposed. Many new efforts were made to increase our society's performance in workforce training, including on-the-job training and apprenticeships. The budget also funds humanitarian and diplomatic efforts in Syria and supports reform through the Middle East.
The president's budget has declared a goal of bringing deficits down below 2% by 2023 and putting the debt on a declining path. It also builds on savings and reforms in health law and strengthens Medicare and Medicaid.
In terms of monetary policy, the government was attempting to be expansionary. The unemployment rate declined near 0.5%, and there has been a steep drop in oil prices since last year. The gains in GDP have been slow, despite the slow growth abroad and high appreciation of the US dollar.
That is all we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to Government News at 4.
Welcome to the Government News at 4 p.m. Today's date is April 20th, 2017.
The total GDP for 2016 has not yet been determined. The growth as a percent is expected to be at 1.8% by the end of this quarter and 2.5% by the end of the year.
After the first quarter, the nation is in a contractionary stage of business cycle. In the first quarter, the GDP increased 5.5% compared to the 1.4% increase for the previous quarter. Additionally, current dollar GDP increased 1.2% compared to 2.3% from the previous quarter.
In the first district in the Beige Book, Boston, many indicators point to an expansionary first quarter. Home sales were up in all 6 states, and many companies are planning on increasing their hiring. The mild New England winter combined with nationwide low fuel costs has led to consumers having more pocket money, causing expansionary policies across the region. 2/3 of manufacturing firms report an increase in sale, and prices remain stable at the healthcare and business IT firm. Hiring is net positive for all companies in the Boston area, and most companies have a positive look for the upcoming year.
The most pressing worries for companies nationwide are politics and the European market. Mild weather and low mortgage rates have encouraged more economic growth and the lower interest rates.
During the first quarter, expansionary fiscal policies were being used. The president is focusing on moving away from a fuel-based economy to support more sustainable power. Wind power is now cheaper than conventional energy, and the solar power industry employs more workers than the coal industry.
The president implemented a new law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which encourages schools to prepare children for graduation better and strengthens scholarships. He is also working on extending retirement plans for part-time workers, modernizing unemployment insurance systems, and making tax cuts for middle-class workers.
Focusing on current day issues as well, the president is making room for the budget to increase support for comprehensive strategies to destroy the Islamic State, sustain military strength, and improve veteran benefits. He is also creating a cybersecurity national action plan to ensure the safety of the government information, and adding funding to programs designed to help diseases and refugees.
In terms of monetary policy, the government was attempting to be expansionary after the first quarter. The FOMC raised the federal funds rate to 0.25% to 0.5% and raised the discount rate to 1%. The neutral federal funds rate is low, and the Fed Reserve's money remains steady at $4.5 trillion.
That's all for today. Thank you for tuning in to the Government News at 4.
Welcome to the Government News at 4 p.m. Today's date is April 21st, 2017. Today we will be looking at national GDP data and comparing it to New Hampshire GDP over the past year, the year before last, and 5 years ago.
The GDP for 2014 was $65 billion, and the percentage change from 2013 to 2014 was 2.21%. In 2011, the GDP was $63 billion, and it increased by 3.21% from 2010. The GDP in 2008 was $61 billion, increasing by 7.23% from the year before.
The GDP has increased over the years in New Hampshire, which makes the national GDP increase too. The nation's total GDP in 2008 was $14 trillion. Moving forward to 2011, the GDP increased to $15 trillion. As of 2014, the nation's GDP was $17.9 trillion, showing a clear increase in GDP from year to year.
That's all for today. Thank you for tuning into the Government News at 4.
Welcome to Government News at 4 p.m. Today's date is April 20th, 2000. Today we are going to predict the GDP and what will it look like for the future.
If you have been watching for the past 6 years, you have probably noticed that the GDP has been increasing. With that happening, Devin and I both predict that it will rise even more the next few upcoming years.
Yes, the GDP has been increasing over the years. In 2008, the real GDP was $54 billion. 3 years later, in 2011, the real GDP was $57 billion, and an increase of 1.5%. The real GDP in 2014 was $59 billion, which was a 2.6% increase from the previous year. Judging from that data, I think it is safe to say the nation's GDP will increase some more before it reaches its peak.
Well, that is all for tonight. Thank you for tuning into Government News at 4.
The majority of producers reported continued to report growth.
You can go. Hey, stop it. Lily, I'm gonna kill you.
After the first quarter, the nation is in a contract.
During the first quarter, expansionary Fiscal policies were used. The president is focusing on moving away from fuel-based economy.
Redo that whole word.
Lily, I'm gonna kill you. Just leave. We'll do it. Just go.
Retail increased at low percentages enough to affect the GDP. Furniture sales were higher. Retail increased at low percentages enough to affect the GDP. Furniture sales were higher for the year in December, but